it's fine. $800,000! So I have my computer here. I took a bunch of notes. It's a 12-page document, so you're in for a wild ride, guys. What can I say? I took a lot of notes. You're gonna be very happy by the end. Do I look ready to go to church after this video? Yes. That's what we need, because I'm gonna need to pray. Hi, my name's Bridget, and I read Cape May by Chip Cheek. So, if you have never heard of Cape May, which most people haven't, I will explain how this book came to me. Like a week ago, there's this tag going around on Twitter, and it was hashtag publishing paid me, where authors would go and say how much they got in advance for their books. Now, from what I can understand, an advance is kind of a symbol of how much they think you're gonna make for the publishing company. They're kind of saying how much they're willing to spend on you. If they pay more, they're more likely to promote your book because they want it to do even better because they paid more money for it. Like, you can make money after based on royalties and like how many people buy the book, but obviously you want a larger advance because it means they think your book's gonna do really well. The tag was to show how women and people of color are typically paid much less than white male people, which is totally cool because usually people don't like to talk about money. So when I was scrolling through, I thought that was really cool because as someone who wants to be an author, it was very interesting to see how much other people got paid in advance for their books. And you can really see how many people aren't paid even a living wage, which is why most people can't just be full-time authors. Even like Victoria Schwab posted her stuff much less than I thought they would be. So, you know, I just scrolled through that tag a bit. I thought it was really interesting and obviously very upsetting because people should just be paid the same because they're putting in a lot of work. And then, out of the blue, this man, Chip Cheek, comments and says, I got paid
$800,000
in advance for my debut book. If you don't know what a debut is, that means it's his first book. Generally, people are paid the least amount of money for their debut because it's like, well, you have nothing to show for, versus like Victoria Schwab just got her first $100,000 deal because it's her 20th book. This man got paid $800,000 for his first book ever. Excuse me? Needless to say, everyone on book Twitter was shook. We were like, we have never heard of this man before in our life. Like, who is he? What is he doing? How did he make this much money? Why is his book worth that much? And I looked up the book on Goodreads. It's called Cape May, which is what I'll be talking about with you guys today. And it only had like 800 reviews on Goodreads. There had only been like 1,000 people who had read it and rated it. And it came out last year, like almost a full year ago. I'm not saying that this is a new release, but they spent $800,000 and his book hasn't even gotten 1,000 reviews on Goodreads. They thought his book was gonna do so good that they paid him like $800,000. I just wanna say I'm gonna harp on the $800,000 bit because to imagine any book is worth $800,000. That's one thing. But also, to think that this book is worth $800,000 is a whole other. There are so many better books. So of course I had to read it because everyone on book Twitter was like, what even is this book? And I was also like, what even is this book? You know, you gotta see if it's worth $800,000. So that's what we're gonna journey here to do, is we're gonna talk about the book. Now, there was one thing that like plagued me. Sorry, plagued is like a terrible word to use right now, but like it did. It plagued me while I was thinking about this book and reading this book and figuring out my opinions for this review and like organizing them. Is it okay for me to hate on this book when the only reason I'm reading it is because he said he got paid $800,000 online and I would not have read it otherwise? It's not a book that I would typically find myself reading. I have never read erotica before, so this was a new territory for me. I also thought if he got paid $800,000, I should be able to read it and think of my opinions, which are that it was bad. He did get paid a lot of money for it, so I don't think he really cares what people think about his book. He probably does care, it's just, I think it's fine because he did get paid a lot of money for this anyway. Me hating on it is probably not gonna stop him from getting to be able to write another book and get paid $800,000 more. I will admit, I think it was good that he shared his number on Twitter. That was very good of him because otherwise we would not have known he got paid this astronomical fund. However, you gotta be able to judge a book. I'm valid because I can always express my opinions, and while I did know he got paid this huge fund, I still think if I had read this without knowing that, I would have thought it was pretty bad and wanted to share it. So there's some thoughts before we dive into this book, Cape May. So this book is set in the late 1950s. It's about a married couple, Henry and Effie, and they are going on their honeymoon to Cape May. Then they run into some other people who are like rich aristocrats kind of thing, and they start to have a good time with them, and then like drama goes down. Let me also add that this was an adult erotica novel. Now, I am technically an adult, but I was not mentally prepared for this book. It was like watching a train wreck. You couldn't look away. You had to keep watching, but it was just so bad. I feel like we all already knew this, but sex sells. That's like a general summary. I'm gonna go more into depth because that's what this video is for, and I'm sure it's very long, so you're like, wow, you really are going in depth. Please watch this whole video to pay for my therapy. My channel's not monetized, but your validation will be enough because I did this for a video, so please watch on. I apologize in advance for everything I'm about to read. But if I had to read it, you have to read it too, because we're in this together now. You might be wondering why I don't have the book. It's because I did not want to spend money on that book. He already got enough money from his publishing company. So I thought I could see if my library had it. They did. They had ebook and audiobook. The audiobook I got on the waitlist for, but it didn't come in. But I got the ebook almost like a day after I put it in, and I read it. So I'm gonna have a few sections in this review. The first one is writing. The second one is characters. We're just gonna go over them and talk about a bit about them. There's 5 main characters. Then we're gonna talk about the plot / romance. I'm just gonna go through the whole book with you because there's a lot going on there, and I felt like we needed to go through it step by step. And then I thought we could just talk about like romance in general in the book and kind of some stats. And then we're gonna talk about boob quotes because he focuses on women's boobs a whole lot. And then we're gonna talk shaming his wife because he does that several times throughout the book. And then we're gonna talk about being of the time because it's supposed to be in the late 1950s. So we're gonna talk about how he handled that, because originally his book was supposed to be about the railroads and Jim Crow, and he kept getting distracted by the romance. And then we'll just sum up our final thoughts on this book at the end. So we're gonna start with the writing. I will say it was not good, aka bad. But like the end section actually kind of impressed me. I was like, that's not bad, but also it didn't match the rest of the book. The way that he would describe things would lead me to be like, can I see through his eyes? Because I cannot imagine something like that. He obviously has a very different view of things than I do. We will get to that. That especially aligns with the boob quotes, because the way he sees boobs, I have some questions. This also led me to ask the question, is this what all straight men are like? Because if so, why? Do you have an answer, please? Let me know. But now we're gonna talk about characters. There's 5 of them. As I said, I'll talk about least important to important. The first person I'm gonna talk about is Max. He was just kind of there the whole time. He's this like wrestler kind of dude. We don't really know much about him. He, I think, was a writer. He's really like the life of the party, and he seems like a fun guy. He didn't really do much to move the plot along. He just kind of existed, except for one part towards the end, which we will get into because it's really messed up and it was my least favorite part of the whole thing. He just kind of seemed like a fun guy, and he cared for his sister, which was really good. Okay, next person, Clara. Clara is having an affair with Max, but like it's not really an affair because they have an arrangement that like they're not going to be together because her husband is like really old and she just wants his money, and they're just fine with it. I thought, based on the start of the book, that I would really not like her because I thought she was going to do something really terrible by the end of the book. Because it starts with Effie being like, oh my god, I hated her when I was little. She was the worst. And honestly, she wasn't that bad. Like, I thought that setup at the beginning was gonna pay off into like us thinking she's okay, and then at the end, she's like a really terrible person. She seemed fine. Like, yes, she's cheating on her husband, but they have an arrangement, so I didn't think it was too bad. Honestly, she was kind of one of the better characters. She just seemed pretty fun, and she hosted a bunch of parties for random people, even if she didn't know them. Then we got Alma, that Henry cheats with. She is Max's little sister. She's fine. Like, I don't like her because she cheated. I don't think I wrote this down in my notes, but there was a point where she was like, I was attracted to you the first time I saw you, and like when I would bend over, I'd make sure my butt was like facing your way so you'd stare at it. And I think I skipped over that, but I vividly remember reading that and being like, excuse me? So, not great. She's definitely not worse than Henry, but she's not good. And then we have Effie, who is Henry's wife, and she didn't deserve what happened to her. Yes, she's kind of annoying at times, but her husband took advantage of her being sick to cheat on her. So, Pretty bad. Also, she does kind of eventually date someone in the future, but at that point I was like, that's fine. Also, we don't really know much about that. And then we have Henry, the main character, who we are seeing his point of view from. He literally only thinks about sex. I swear 85% of this book is just him being like, oh my god, what if I have sex with them? Oh my god, they're so hot. Oh my god, I want to have sex with them. What is wrong with him? I would like to say. So many of his motives were just wrong, and he would like explain why he was doing things, and I'd be like, that doesn't make it better. So since you now know the characters, I would like to ask the question, was I supposed to like them? Because I really didn't. I wasn't sure if he thought I was supposed to like Henry. Was he supposed to be a likable character? Were any of them supposed to be likable characters? I hated all of them. So now we're gonna go into my deep dive of the plot. I hope you are prepared because I surely am not. So page 1, Henry and Effie have just arrived at Cape May, and they come here, it's kind of like fall, almost winter. Come here for their honeymoon because Effie had really great memories of it when she was a child. So she says, it's nothing, she said. It's nothing, really. Don't coo over me. I'm just tired, that's all. She smiled at him. I'm glad you like it. We're going to have a wonderful time. And I would just like to ask why she's so upset and like gloomy at the beginning. It's never explained. It's never dived into more. I thought we were gonna like find out like why she's so upset. We don't know. She's just weird and emotional. And I guess that's what happens when you let men write women. Page 2, you learn the vital detail that they are both virgins. Effie insists that they sleep in the attic that she slept in when she was a child, because of course she does. I thought that was a weird choice, but we're gonna go with it. And I would just like to point out that he says on page 2, he could humor her for the rest of her life, he wanted to say, but Effie laughed at expressions of deep feeling. She had been on the verge of laughing all through their wedding ceremony. Who laughs through their wedding ceremony? I don't think anyone would do that, so that decision was questionable because I feel like that's the most serious moment of your life. Weird character trait there. Then on page 3, you get their first time having sex. Now in this dim room on an early Sunday afternoon, when they would normally be in their church clothes having dinner with their families, Effie lay naked on the rose-patterned duvet. He hovered over her, fumbling between her legs until she looked down, took his penis lightly between her fingertips, set it in the right spot, and there she was. Their intimacy deepened in an instant. His breath caught, she lay still. In a few seconds, it was over. Afterward, they lay beside each other looking at the ceiling tiles. He wondered whether he felt irreversibly changed. Well, Effie said, I guess we've done it then. Wow. So momentous. Later, as they walked down the beach in the early evening, they held hands and had little to say to each other. What was there to say? They knew each other now, in the biblical sense. Yes, because once you have sex, you stop talking to each other. It was at this point that I realized I was in for a long ride, but I knew I couldn't give up so easily. So I persevered for you. Just want to point out this gross. So they're on their honeymoon, so they have more sex. His penis lay tipped against her thigh. He liked how it looked there. Ew. And then he personifies his penis, which, why is his penis a character? And he should just talk to his wife, but he says, how could he ask what she wanted? How could he tell her what he wanted? I know this is before like the sexual revolution, but she's your wife, you can talk to her. And then we have this questionable moment that is one of my least favorite things that was described, where we learn about his bowel movements. The days were long, there was little to do. She took naps in the afternoons, and Henry coveted the time alone. He'd been constipated since before their wedding, and only when she was asleep did he feel comfortable enough to try to go to the bathroom, far away from her in the lavatory off the kitchen. The results were always unsatisfying. Why did he feel the need to include information about his bowel movements? That is the last thing I wanted to read about in a book. We never hear about characters going to the bathroom, and there's a reason for that. We don't want to hear about it. That's too much information. May I remind you, $800,000. They're not really enjoying their time there. They think they should maybe just go back early and leave, but then they decide to head over to the house that has lights on because that's the only one that has any human, like, seeming light going on. So they're like, oh, we should head over there and see who's there and kind of see what's going on because there's a bunch of cars there. So they meet Clara and Max, and Alma's also there, but you don't really meet her. And they have dinner, and I don't know why, but this bothered me, so I'm gonna read it to you. He was shoveling it in. He said this to Effie. Boy, I'm just shoveling this in. Usually stuff like that makes me really laugh. In this case, it did not. And then we're going to talk about one of the racist things that happened. He said the woman she was talking to, who appeared to be Mexican or Arabian or maybe just Jewish. What a terrible descriptor. He's like, I don't care much and I don't know about other people and other races, so you know, she could be any of these 3 different things. She's not white though. Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. He's at the party, he's drunk, and he goes outside and to pee, because of course there's no bathroom inside he could go to. And he hears people having sex. He hears them crying like, oh, yup. He said he had never actually heard a woman make that sound before. Effie hadn't made it. Maybe it's a sign he's bad at sex. Also, he just stands and listens and like, that's not cool in my opinion. And then the next day, she says she's never gonna drink again, but she drinks many other times in the novel, so that's a lie. Here's another sex scene that I read and went, what am I reading here? He had an erection again, and when he was naked, he put his hands on his hips and waited for Effie to admire it. Jesus, she cried. She stood by the vanity table in her underwear. On the Lord's Day? The Lord is pleased with us, he said, and dragged her down onto the bed. She made a show of giving in, sighing, lying flat on her back, arms flung out. Just do what you gotta do, heathen, I won't help you. And so he pulled her underwear off her hips and pressed his nose in, breathed in deeply the close, pleasant smell of her hair. He gave it a lingering kiss. She got up on her elbows then, alert, as if to say, what do you think you're doing, sir? And in answer, he freed her from her underwear, spread her legs, opened her with his tongue, a soft, bursting, warm and smoothly wet, like olive oil, the baffling folds of skin, a scent mostly of dial soap. There were several things I would like to point out there. 1, on the Lord's Day, just seemed like a fun little thing, a conversation that I was like, oh, we're saying that stuff. 2, it sounds like she pulled off his underwear twice. I mean, maybe he pulled it like halfway down and then all the way off, but it was just a weird thing to like see that happen twice. 3, like olive oil and dial soap. There are many ways you can describe vaginas. That ain't it, chief. $800,000. So then they start to hang out with Max and Claire and Alma, and they start to have a really great time, and they're like, maybe we should stay here the whole time. And so they do. They go out sailing. That is most of what they do. They don't have any other hobbies. They go into town and they sail. And on the sailing, of course, they're wearing bathing suits. And he says, beneath it, she wore a blue bathing suit and her hips were bare and generous. You could sink in between them and disappear. And I would just like to say, you have a wife, sir? And that is not your wife that you were describing? Then a few pages later, they were all beautiful, Henry thought. And in the fullness of his mood, he included himself. Now, I don't know if that's just the fact that I'm unconfident about myself and I've never been like, you know what? All of us here, we're pretty hot. But I've never done that. And he seems very full of himself. And that is not a positive in my book, so I was not a fan of him. Then he says that he's thinking about maybe going to college. He thinks about going to Emory, which is my school, so you know, we knew it was going to be included because that's the only school anyone ever knows in Georgia. He says he's maybe going to study history or English, and as an English major, I feel like I have the right to say, but I don't think you're going to get a well-paying job for that, and Effie really seems all about the money. The other trio, they give them nicknames, Katie, Scarlett, and Hank, for Effie and Henry, and I did not understand those. I know Katie Scarlett is like for Catherine O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, but where did that come from? It just came out of nowhere. They just started calling them that, and I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't make sense to me. Then like they're telling stories with each other because they're having a good time. Occasionally, Clara made the mistake of trying to tell a story of her own in Max's way, about her old girlfriends in Philadelphia or her failure to impress Richard's business partners, and the laughter would be forced. But then Max would always came to her rescue, making a joke of it that was his own triumph, but that also saved Clara's story. And typically, I would not have an issue with that. Like, sure, maybe some people are funnier than others, but he continually demeaned women around him and was like, well, she can't be funny, so, you know, of course, women can't be funny. Is this video funny? Please like it if you think it is. Just a page later, Effie tells a story, and Max clapped his hands together, fell back in his chair, and laughed in an exaggerated way that bothered Henry, as if Max felt the need to bestow his approval. The story wasn't that funny. Way to hype up your wife, man. Your wife just told a story she thinks is funny. Max is doing a great job. Even if he doesn't think it's funny, he's like laughing a bunch. And he's like, it's not that funny. Like, she's not funny. My wife thinking she's funny? What a ridiculous scenario. So that was kind of the start of the many things that bothered me about him demeaning women. Then we get into the part where they become criminals. They say half the people who summer here don't lock their doors for the winter, and the ones that do don't lock their windows. So this is a PSA to lock your doors and windows because people will break in. So this is where he starts to notice Alma. He says all night, barely conscious of it, he'd been unable to keep himself from glancing at her legs, her bare feet bobbing rhythmically while she read, the lovely curve of her behind. And I would just like to repeat, you have a wife? And then later he's about to have sex with his wife again because they're married and this is their honeymoon, and he says Henry lay back admiring her, trying to tamp down the feeling that he was inadequate. But he is inadequate. He keeps wanting to have sex with other women. And then we got another one of those weird descriptions of people during sex. He says, in the moonlight, Effie was vividly naked. The glowing white skin, the black patch between her legs, the black coins of her nipples. The black coins of her nipples? She's white. Why are her nipples black coins? This is one of the instances where I'm like, what is he seeing? Because I do not understand. And then they have sex, and one of the things he describes during sex is Alma's long, slender legs. So he's thinking about other women while he's having sex with his wife, and then he says, Henry, stop moving and let her do all the work, because women really have to do all the work. And then Effie had really found something. For the first time, she let out a little cry. Oh, seems like she actually enjoyed it that time as opposed to the other times, so good for her. They continue to tell stories with their new crew and having fun with them. Henry broke it by jiggling the ice in his glass, and Max got up to take it, and Effie's as well, and went over to the bar. Now, I don't know the manners of the 1950s, and like, sure, probably hosts were supposed to take care of stuff like that. But also, I feel like it's kind of rude, and he could have at least tried to go get his own drink. That's just me, though. They're continuing to have this fun little time where they're drinking together in the living room, which is basically all they do throughout the whole book. If you're asking where the plot is, it's not here yet. He's talking about Effie, his wife, finally. Her tone was an act. Under the Afghan, Henry had pushed his finger past the elastic hem of her bathing suit, and she'd opened her legs a bit so he could reach her. She was wet, the muscles in her groin tense. Right in front of my salad? That's the only thing I could be thinking of when I was reading this. I was like, excuse me, sir, you're doing what now? Then they have sex again, and he says angels averted their eyes, which, me too, so I guess I'm also an angel. And then so they're going out on the boat again, because of course they are, that's all they have to do with their life. And he describes Alma getting out of the water, and he describes her as thus. Her hair slicked back, water streaming off her body, glistening in the low red sun, like a white and gold seal. A seal? Are you sure that's the right word? Because now all I'm picturing is a seal in a bathing suit. I could not get that picture out of my mind. I was like, wow, is he calling her fat? But also like, why a seal? Weird choice. A seal? This is just like a weird thing I thought to point out. Is they're getting ready to go somewhere, and he says Alma bundled her hair atop her head so it stayed there on its own. Weird way to phrase it. She obviously had something to hold it back with, whether it be a hair tie or whatnot. Hair does not just stay on the top of your head. If I wanted to go like this, oh look, it came back down. I would need a hair tie. I don't know if men know that, but you know, a new fact for you. It's pouring rain, so they go over to their friend's house. They go over to Clara and Max's and stuff, and they give them some of their clothes because now they're all sopping wet. Once they get dressed, he comments, Effie's nipples stood up through her pajamas. Because of course he had to comment on it. They go on a walk at some point. He says to Alma, we lost you there at the end, he said, and winced at the almost fatherly tone he'd put on it. I just want to remember that he said fatherly tone there for later. Also, I just want to say this again, but he's literally so horny every opportunity he has, he thinks about sex. Men, please confirm if this is a true story of how you guys think. He liked the look of it when it was up, like some kind of tall mushroom. The goose flesh testicles sagging below it pleased him too. He learned from the dictionary that testicles shared the same root as testify, and it meant witness, as in to bear witness to a man's virility. And when he'd shared this with Hoke, they'd been in 10th grade. They'd fallen over laughing and made grandiose claims about the size of their balls. Dick, balls, those few cubic inches of flesh. How many hours of concentration had he put into them over the years? Then skipping a few lines. Hoke's was larger. Ned Connor's was larger still. Maynard's was a button in a nest. He'd always come to the conclusion that his was respectable. He would pause sometimes before his dresser mirror to admire it. So that's a man's perspective of their dick. If any of you women out there were wondering, there it is. I would just like to note that he described it as a tall mushroom. Thank you. And also, it just seems like the way he compared his dick to the other people's seems like he has a small dick, and he's got small dick energy, so that's fair. But also, he just takes some time to admire his own dick. I don't know, but I don't just take time to just stare at myself in the mirror naked. Maybe he does, it's fine. $800,000. So they're staying at the other house and he just masturbates on the couch because of course he does. And then Alma walks in. He hasn't finished masturbating, but Alma walks in. She must have seen him. She must have walked in on him on purpose. Power move, honestly. Then they describe their past because they're getting to know each other there. And he says, we moved in with my Uncle Carswell not long after Daddy died. He's Daddy's eldest brother. He and Mama married and then they had my sister Emily. And I just want to point out that's kind of like in Hamlet where Claudius marries Hamlet's father. I know that's very odd to compare this to a Shakespeare play, but we had just read Hamlet. So they're just kind of sitting there, they're talking a little bit. Their feet are up on the table and they're brushing each other. And he says nothing was happening, but if Effie were to get up and find them there, he thought it wouldn't have looked good. And I would just like to say, he still did it! The next day, they're on the boat again. It's literally just them hanging out right now. And he says, his eyes drifted for a moment over her body to where the fabric of her bathing suit was crimped at her groin. Now, I'd just like to say, that's not his wife! That day, Effie gets sick. He says, a tide of selfless, gallant feeling rose in him. He did literally nothing, and yet he feels selfless and gallant. I don't know why. Also, if you were wondering, because I know this was the part of the story you were riveted in, but his week and a half of constipation ended then, just thought you all should know. And then I just would like to read to you him masturbating again. He tried to read Boswell, but his thoughts wandered to the wedge in Alma's bathing suit, to her hand on his arm, to the way she'd pouted at him when she'd said goodbye. He went to the downstairs lavatory, dropped his trousers, knelt at the toilet bowl, and finished what he'd started last night, before Alma had walked in on him, thinking first of Effie out of loyalty, and then giving in of Alma pulling him aside somewhere lush and green, peeling her bathing suit off, and the orgasm seized him before he could quite picture her naked to his satisfaction. A shot of semen struck the back of the bowl and remained there after he flushed. He was impressed. He knew it was wrong to think of Alma, and he did so anyway. Also, he was impressed with the fact that his semen stayed stuck to the toilet bowl. Gross. Then he's caring for his sick wife. She's asleep, I think. So she's sick, and he's wondering why his other friends haven't come and check on him and been like, hey, come hang out with us, we're gonna play charades. Wouldn't they figure Henry was feeling listless and bored and invite him over for a game of charades? Not that he would accept, no. He would decline magnanimously. But still, it seemed a waste of good health and youth to spend an entire evening alone. Way to be there for your wife. I know she's asleep, but still being like, I'm stuck here, she's sick. Why do I have to spend my time alone and bored? I'm like, you swore to be there for each other in sickness and in health. She's sick, you gotta be there for her. Another time when he disrespects his wife and he says he'd never seen anyone more beautiful. I'd just like to say that was not his wife he was describing. Also, I would like to point out that at this point, his wife is sick, but she's kind of still doing things in the day, getting up and hanging out with them. There's gonna be like this big dance, and they're gonna go to it, as I kind of said. They broke into one of the houses. It's like this big like Victorian kind of mansion thing, and they broke in there, they had a fun time, they looked at wigs and stuff. And they're having such a good time now that they found some other people to hang out with that they decided to lengthen their trip because now they're really having a fun time. So they wanted to spend more time in Cape May instead of going home. Previously, their last day was supposed to be the day after the big party on the pier. Instead, they wanted to extend it because they were having such a fun time. Also, Effie was sick, so she didn't really want to travel. But they go to this party. Effie's sick, so she's not feeling too well, but she goes and she has a fun time. Except she's gonna go back to bed after the party because she's so exhausted. At the party, he says, Alma reached her arm out and wiped her fingers on the side of Henry's jacket. That decided it. He would put Effie to bed and then he would go to the after party. Because he couldn't stay home with his wife. No, he had to be with this other woman. So he puts his wife to bed and then he goes to this party. Clara is throwing a big party for everyone who was at that party. She's like, hey everyone, come to my after party to have some more fun. And there's this lady who is doing like card tricks. She says, focus to him. And he says he would not be able to watch anything closely as long as she had her hand on his leg. As long as she was close enough that he could feel her warmth and smell her perfume, but he tried. He really cannot focus anytime a woman is near him. No wonder people were so iffy about dress codes, how women have to cover up so much, because men just cannot handle themselves. This is a lesson to teach your men to not think that way. He goes and protects Alma because this guy is like really hitting on her, which fair enough, but also he's really jealous of the guy, so not fair enough. So they go into this room because the guy is like really trying to hit on her and they're like, they get away. One of the two things I agreed with in this book was this line that Alma says, boys, they're so much more fragile than girls. Everyone thinks it's the other way around, but it almost never is. It's a burden. Fact! Because men don't know how to express their emotions, they're more emotional, but in like worse ways. Instead, women, like, I get angry and then I just cry. Seems like a better way to handle my emotions, just saying. I don't want to punch people, I want to just sit down and cry. And then we get to the first actually cheating part of the whole book. This happens on page 139, which is about halfway through, just past halfway. Okay, so we're gonna read it together. She smiled. He kissed her teeth. She stroked him slowly with her fist. Oh God, he said. Their lips were still touching, but they weren't kissing. They were only breathing. Do you want to fuck me? She said. Yes, he said. His heart was pounding. Yes, I want to fuck you. You know it's consensual, so there's that. I would just like to point out a few things within this section that we just read. They say he kissed her teeth. I've noticed this is kind of a thing in romance. As a person who hasn't kissed anyone, I would just like to ask, what do you mean by kissing her teeth? Sounds weird. Their lips were still touching, but they weren't kissing. Really awkward. I will spare you the rest of the details, but they have sex. And it's the first time he puts in effort and he might actually be all right at it. He's improving, guys. Also, she tells him not to come inside her, pull out. I would just like to point out this is the late 1950s again. Why can't he just wear a condom? Condoms were invented in 1855. Yes, I did look that up for this, but he could have just worn a condom. They did exist then. Why was he not using one? Wear condoms, people. Protect yourself. Then he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, that was an accident. Obviously that's not what she wants to hear. Then he says he couldn't believe he'd done what he'd done. And so he replayed it moment by moment, as if in search of the proof, until in spite of himself, he was erect again. So I'm getting from this is he was not sorry for cheating on his wife. And then he decides he would never be unfaithful to his wife again. I'm glad he's finally having that realization and thought after he's already cheated on his wife once. A bunch of these things are just like now him like trying to justify all of this. It's terrible. Okay, I'm so angry. It's fine. It's fine. He's talking about telling his wife and he's like, she shouldn't know. She shouldn't know about it because knowing it would only hurt her pointlessly. That God knew was another matter. And when he thought of this, a shadow passed over him. But boys will be boys. Name an upstanding man who had never, name a faithful husband who had never once. He could square it with his conscience. He could pray. I'm infuriated. This is one of the worst paragraphs of the book. So he's trying to justify his cheating rather than just saying, I fucked up, I should fix that. No, he's just like, you know, boys will be boys. That's the worst argument in the history of arguments, okay? That just excuses any bad actions that men take. It's like, well, you know, boys will be boys, men will mess up, it's fine. There's no girls will be girls. That's not a thing to be like, well, I just cheated on my husband. Girls will be girls, it's fine. No, you don't get to say that. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself by talking about the time period. I know that this is written to be in the 1950s, so we're looking at it through that lens. But also, this book came out last year. Like, I know the rationales change in our heads from time to time, but since this book came out last year, I don't think we can still accept that as an answer. I know it's written about another time, but I still don't think using that rationale should be good. It's not good. So we're gonna move on. Time passes. He and Alma meet up at the big house. He like talks to Alma, and then the next time he goes and meets with her at the big Victorian house because they keep breaking in. They have sex again many times. We'll get to it. He describes her when she's naked as having a constellation of moles on her stomach. Bam, see a doctor. And then he says one prominent one raised like a third nipple just under her left breast. Not a great description. Her secrets. He could have turned back. He could have apologized again and gathered up his clothes. She would have screamed at him, thrown the kerosene lamp at him, and burned the place down, but he could have run and convinced himself that he was still a faithful man. But he was standing there naked himself, his cock sticking out from him like a bowsprit. And there was no turning back. He even says he could have stopped, and he doesn't. Acknowledging the wrong doesn't make it right. $800,000. A few pages later, after they've had sex all night, a star-shaped gap between her thighs. I don't think that's how bodies look. Star-shaped gap does not sound like the correct way to describe it. And then after that time, he says that every moment his intention was fixed onto that one object, to be alone with Alma. At this point, he's not even trying to hide the fact that all he wants to do is just be with Alma, and his wife is still sick. His wife is sick. What does he do? Cheat on her. You might be asking where the plot is. I will tell you the plot is just a string of sex scenes and then how those sex scenes affect their life. And then he also says the secret was almost as sweet as the thing itself. Secret relationships are one of my favorite tropes. I think they're really fun. Not like this. I like the secret relationships like when they have to keep it from their friends because they think telling their friends would change everything. Like in Friends with Monica and Chandler. Or in Parks and Rec where like their jobs are kind of conflicting, so like one of them would be fired with Leslie and Ben, but like it's still fine. And then also just like in Red, White, and Royal Blue where like if they told anyone they'd have an international incident. Those things are fine because like it's a secret relationship, but the reason isn't that they're cheating on someone. They're on the boat again because of course they are. I only thought you should know, she said. She was up on her tiptoes, her flexed calves looking down into the churning water. Every time I look at you, I get wet. You're giving me a hard on. Let me see, she said. He laughed, looking around. No one was paying attention to them. Just a peek, she said. Come on. And so he pulled the elastic of his trunks out and down, exposing it for an instant. And she smiled at it and left him there by the tank to stare at the lobsters and cool off. Is that supposed to be cute? Because it's not. And then the gang decides to play hide and seek, because, you know, that's a fun little game that they play. And Alma decides that's the perfect time to give Henry a blowjob. Yep. Then he impatiently waits for his wife to fall asleep every night so he can sneak out to have sex with Alma. And he says soon she would be asleep, but not soon enough. Never soon enough. How dare his wife try to just live her life when he wants to go cheat on her? I'd also like to point out that Henry has a foot fetish and he likes to suckle on people's toes. He is again describing Alma here. She was finer, less profuse than Effie. They wandered the house exploring things. She did. He couldn't keep his hands off her. While she looked through the kitchen drawers, he nestled his penis between her buttocks and cupped her breasts. He also uses the word tender bulb, and I would ask if he would not, because gross. And also, what I'm getting from this is that she's having fun exploring the house and he's just here for sex. It's consistent with his character. He just can't focus on anything but sex. This is another bad scene. It's fine. You ready, guys? You ready for another sex scene? Okay, page 166. They made use of the fresh baby carrots they found in the refrigerator, of the jar of strawberry jam, of the canned sliced peaches. They made themselves slick with olive oil. Again, olive oil. Their knees slipped over the linoleum. They fell laughing. Why? $800,000. They're on the boat again, half naked because swimming. And he says, desire engendered desire. He wanted to fuck everyone. He was going mad. He has no more, he just wants to fuck everyone. You know, it's boys will be boys. And then Alma asks the big question that we've all been wondering. Is he gonna leave his wife for her? What's the future gonna look like? He tells Alma he loves her. He's like, you wanna know about the future? Wow, I'd never thought about the future. Because of course he didn't. He's just having fun having sex. Because, you know, if he considered his future, that would make his life hard. Why would he do that? But now he has to actually think about it. And then they have sex again, because of course they do. She was curled between his legs, resting her head on his thigh, running her finger up and down his penis, bringing it back to life. She inspected it closely and kissed it. She caressed his testicles. He told her about the root of the word, testify. She laughed and lifted them gently to her nose and breathed in. They smelled like pancake batter, she said. What kind of pancake batter is she having? Because that sounds terrible. And he sleeps in the next day because he doesn't sleep at night because they have sex all night. So he just like randomly sleeps throughout the day. He takes like naps. And Effie thinks that he has insomnia. That's why he's not in bed, because he just gets up, and he gets up really early because he's taking a walk. And that's why he comes home. When he wakes up this day, Effie is gone, and she has gone out on the boat with Clara and Max. Alma has stayed behind to just wait for him to wake up, because she's just a kind person, you know? He's really upset that Effie went somewhere without him. He's like, I would never go anywhere without her. One, excuse me, sir, you're having an affair. I don't think you can speak about her like that when she's just going out on a boat with some of your friends. Oh yes, Effie's gotten better by now, so she's like not sick. Two, when she was sick, he went out and had a fun time with their friends. And so in her mind, he's having this terrible insomnia, so she thinks he's sick. So in her mind, she could go out with her friends just like he did when she was sick, because he needs to sleep because he's obviously exhausted. So she thought, I'll let him sleep and I'll go out with our friends and have a fun time. It's the same rationale in her mind that like they were both sick, so they're doing the same thing. But in his mind, she's leaving him. He takes this opportunity to have sex with Alma again. She draws him naked and he says his penis wouldn't stay still. She laughed. I was also laughing because this is terrible. So basically what happens is, this is kind of where like the plot goes down, is they say they love each other. Alma says they should run away together. He agrees because he loves her. They say they will meet up at the Victorian house down the street the next day and they will take the train out. She tells everyone the next morning that she's gonna be leaving that day. They all kind of wanted her to leave, kind of subtly. They didn't say they wanted her to leave, but they were kind of playing it. Max drives her to the train station. He says to them that she got on the train. Henry's like, she left. Wow, she just kind of ignored our plan and she just left. So I'm free to live my life with Effie and it's gonna be fine. And like, this will be our secret. That was like a wonderful time that we had, but now it's over and I can just go back to living my life. It's perfect. He is feeling good. He's like, you know, I'm good with that. Then Clara's like, I'm so glad she left. She was really inhibiting our style. And then they all get super drunk because of course they do. They get drunk every day. They're like going around playing games and stuff. So they're all half naked because they played this card game where like you had to strip if you picked out an ace to your underwear. They're all half naked and then start to get a little intimate. Just the way it's described, it's bad. Henry's like, I'm not gonna do anything unless Effie does. Effie like brushes back Clara's hair and he's like, okay, we can fuck other people. He has sex with Clara. While that's happening, he is staring at Effie having sex with Max. Let me just like give you a moment. Yes, that did happen. It's not an orgy because an orgy requires 5 people. I looked up how many people it needed to be an orgy. So there's only 4 of them. I don't know what that's called, but it's gross. I would just like to also point out that he describes Max's dick as being both diabolical and evil looking, and I would like to know what makes a dick diabolical and evil looking. I would like to know what separates a penis from a evil penis. They're all 4 having sex in the room, right? So like Effie is having a really good time with Max because Max is obviously very good at having sex. I just like to point that out. She never looks at Henry during the sex scene because they know they're both having sex with different people. And after this scene happens, he says his little Effie, his wife, he didn't know her anymore. What she'd done, what she let him, Max, do to her, it was one thing for Henry, but for her, his wife, his girl, a lady. So he's saying she's now terrible because she cheated on him and didn't look at him while she was having sex with a different guy. He's also saying there's a different standard for women cheating than men cheating, which there is in society, but also it should be the same because they are both having sex with different people at the same time in the same room. So he really judges her for this action. And he screams at her and he's like, oh my God, how could you? And he's like, do you love him? Like, do you love Max now? Which she's not. She says she doesn't love Max, obviously. And he does all of this while knowing he was having sex at the same time, even though he says that doesn't mean anything. But can I remind you that he was having like this week-long affair with Alma, who he told repeatedly that he loved her and they would run away together. And he's yelling at Effie for having sex with this guy because he thinks she loves him and she's cheating on him. How can he judge her for this one action so harshly? I don't understand. He even says, I will quote again, what I did, it didn't mean anything. But you, that was something else. I was looking at you the whole time, Effie. You wanted him. You were begging for him. I could see it. You made yourself a little whore. I've never seen you that way before. You've never been that way with me. Never. That I can tell you. You wanted him. You liked it. Don't tell me you didn't. Can I remind everyone of the affair he had? Also, maybe he's just bad at sex and he's upset about that. And like, Max isn't bad at sex. And then he says she was his wife and she belonged to him. I'm gonna return to the point where you don't own her. She's her own person. I don't want to get too preachy, but like, owning another person is wrong. Shocker. So then Alma comes back. She's like, why didn't you come meet me? I was waiting for you. And he's surprised she's returned because he was so certain she got on that train. He also says he loved the smell of her unwashed hair. I don't know why, but that sounds kind of gross to me. So then he and Alma get kind of close and intimate. She comes into his room where he's sleeping with Effie. He pulls her downstairs and he's like, oh my God, no. He tells her that he doesn't want her and can't be with her and like he wants to go back to his life. And she's very upset. And then Effie comes down and sees and everything is revealed. And I just want to say the first thing he says to Effie when he sees her is, Effie, you're up. That's the way you want to greet a woman after she finds out about your affair. We also find out that Alma left her naked drawing of him next to Effie's side of the bed, so she would definitely see it no matter what. Even if she didn't see him and Alma, she would know. Honestly, I was like, that's good, because she deserved to know. He was cheating on her. Effie gets super upset and she runs away. Alma's really upset because he doesn't want to run away with her, so she leaves as well. And he thinks Alma's staying in the Victorian house, so he says he would tell Alma she had ruined his life. He would strike her with the back of his hand. Then maybe they would run away together after all. Yes, because physical violence is the best way to solve your problems. Great, why didn't I think of that? No, never hit someone, especially not someone you're in a relationship with. That's called abuse. And then he also thinks that after he's hit her, she will still want to run away with him. I guess that's on being in the 50s. And I guess if she doesn't want to run away with him, he'll force her to. Abusive relationship alert! After he says that, he goes to the Victorian house down the street. He sees a light on. He's like, oh my God, Alma's there. He's like screaming out, Alma, Alma. And shocker, the people who actually own the house are there. And they call the police because someone is breaking into their house. Sweet justice! Except I hate the police. So let me get this straight, the young one said, turning in his seat to look back at Henry. You're on your honeymoon, but you and this sweetheart, not your wife? You just break into that house every night to screw? Oh, Mac, we can't arrest this fellow. He said to the other one who was driving. "We should give him a medal. He's my hero." Do I need to explain why this is wrong? I feel like it's self-explanatory. Was the author trying to be like, everyone loves sex here, it's fine? Like, is he supposed to make me be like, this was a great move on Henry's part. He's hilarious. I don't feel bad for him. I want him to go to jail for so long. He calls Clara from the police department because she's the only one person he can think to call. And she convinces the people to sadly drop the charges. I'm very upset. She comes and gets him out of jail, and she says she feels bad for him. I certainly don't, and I think he deserves a whole lot more punishment. He does say one thing I agree with. He'd always felt generously about himself, but now he knew what he was. A liar, an adulterer, and a criminal. He could never go home again. He could never face his family. He is all those things. He's a liar, an adulterer, and a criminal. It's never addressed again though, so we're gonna just forget about that, I guess. And then he's just surprised when Clara tells him Alma was super distraught and came and Max helped her and took them away and they left. He's like, she was upset that I didn't want to run away with her after I said I would because I said I loved her. Yeah, that's kind of what happens when you break up a relationship. People are gonna be upset. And then Effie finally comes back and she tells him, "You're a monster, Henry. You're a hypocrite. You made me feel ashamed of myself, but all the time." And I was here like, yes, tell him, Effie, tell him. Because that was all of the anger I had been feeling. I was like, he's been cheating on her and he's mad at her for cheating. Bitch, what? She ends up staying with him because he's gonna make a lot of money because he can sell all his land when he's older. Yes, I am upset. This would forever be a shadow over their marriage, he admitted to himself. But maybe all of this would enrich it somehow. It was a trial which over time would deepen their love. He's really trying to rationalize his choices. Ew! No! Don't rationalize, don't cheat! This is the other paragraph that I cannot stand in this book. Here we go, guys. Get ready. He was a man, wasn't he? What did Effie expect? If she thought he was the first husband to cheat on his wife, she was a fool. In fact, it was likely that every husband had cheated on his wife at some time or another. It might be argued that such a devotion to one person was not, in fact, what nature had intended, for either men or women, but especially for men, who, from the dawn of time, had been used to wandering. In every man's heart, from the town drunks to the mayor's, even in the reverend's heart, there was the memory of an affair. He would bet on it. The abandonment of reason to desire, vividly, intensely carnal, the thoughts would rise up and take over. There was no stopping them. She'd been spoiled. That was the problem. She was a little princess doted on by her father, made to believe in fairy tales. What is that? What is that? What is that? What is that? What? Excuse me? $800,000! Then she says she's pregnant, and he makes this joke like, periods, I don't understand them because they're like the moon and werewolves and stuff. And I'm like, ha ha ha, he doesn't understand periods. Then he says again she belonged to him because ownership is okay here. Then they make love again, which I hate. He so easily got her back. Then we're in the final chapter, and he is describing their life kind of in like a fast forward motion where he's like going through the years and he's like, we had 3 kids and then we lost 1 kid because he died. He's like a train conductor or something. So then he says he had an affair with the young widow who ran the boarding house. He would believe later that the change in Effie had made him stray. She changes after their child dies, because of course she does. It's very upsetting and traumatic. But in fact, the affair had started while she was pregnant with Brian, and things were bright. What is wrong with him? He cheats again! This bitch! And then he describes his wife. We'll go back to the part where he describes his wife before. And he says she was 32 that year, and still pretty. She would be pretty all her life. But 4 children and a southern diet had made her fat, and Henry no longer feared that she would attract another man's attention. You can tell he really loves his wife by the way he fat shames her and says no one else will want her. No, but then she cheats on him and like, finally some justice here. And then he cheats on her again with another girl who's 24 when he's like 36, which age isn't the most important thing, but like marital status should be. And he's still married. And then he kisses another lady just like randomly. And then he says, after Jeannie Taylor and the unfortunate kiss with Vivian, Henry was never again unfaithful to her. He might have been if the right woman had approached him, but none had. He was still handsome, he thought, though he'd lost his hair and developed a generous paunch. What am I supposed to do? Give him a gold star for not cheating a 6th time? Good for you, man. You could stay faithful to your wife after cheating on her 5 times. And then like at the end it says like she had died and he found these letters from her to this other guy, Charlie Morel. And he says if she ever forgave him, he couldn't say, but he could forgive her for Charlie Morel. I would never forgive him, that's just me. Good on him for forgiving her. Is that supposed to make him seem like a better person? Because I still think he's the worst. So yeah, that's the end of the book. Now we're on to like the strictly romance part where I'm just going to talk about a little bit of stats. I will say I think the only time he describes sex as making love is when he's having sex with Effie, his wife, which there's that. When I was going through for my notes, I did a little bit of stats. There's 16 scenes describing him having sex with his wife, 11 scenes on him cheating with Alma, though those are much longer and more detailed, so you could argue that they count as more of the book. There's 2 scenes with other cheating mentioned towards the end, and then there's the one weird scene from hell where they have sex with different people in the same room. There's 2 scenes of him masturbating, and there's 1 scene of him listening to other people having sex. There's 33 scenes here that I had to sit through. Now we're on the boob quotes because he doesn't know how to describe boobs. Hello, she cried, looking at Henry, whose eyes dropped involuntarily to her breasts. He makes everything about boobs. She was at least as tall as he was, with a strong jaw and broad shoulders, and her breasts seemed always on the verge of falling out of her top. It was an effort not to stare at them. I'm sure it's very hard for him, literally and figuratively. The woman in the slip was hopping in place. Her breasts bounced wildly. Seems to be all he focuses on when he's looking at a woman. Her breasts lit the room. What kind of breasts does she have? Does she have lights on them? Because that is not how anatomy works. You were a perfect lady, Clara said. You didn't display your tits like Vera Watts did you? God. Truth or dare among adults? Really? But you were gone by then. I was sure you'd skip town. How long are you staying? Henry felt a pang. He didn't know who Vera Watts was, but he wished he'd seen her tits. Her breasts glowed. They did what now? Again, that's not how light works. It's not how boobs work. The breasts don't glow when the rest of the body, the body doesn't glow. She looked down at her breasts and adjusted them. I don't think adjust is the right word, and I don't think you would do that. Her breasts filled all the space in the room. I don't know what that means. Did it mean she was like right next to his face, or like they were all he could see? That's not physically possible. Why would you phrase it that way? So those are some fun boob quotes, right? So now we're going to talk about shaming his wife. They were trying on wigs, and one wig made Effie look kind of like Clara. So he said there was the real Clara, and across from her, a short, squat version. His wife. Squat. Not a good word. Effie had to put on Alma's dress because they had stayed over and they needed to borrow clothes. On Effie, it strained at the seams. It pinched her sides and barely contained her breasts. I look awful in this, she said, examining herself in the mirror. You look fine, Henry said. How reassuring. So then they're like, by the water. And this is when Effie gets sick, and he says, you look awful, baby. I know she's sick, but that's not how you phrase it. Then he's thinking back to his wife and how they got together. He'd always thought she was pretty, a little more short and plump than he liked. Sturdy, his mother had said, a word he could never quite erase from his mind. You can tell from this he really loves his wife. So now we're going to talk about the being of the time aspect of this. Some of the crowd seemed to know intimately of the integration of the schools, vis-a-vis the tensions in Little Rock, which everyone seemed to support without question. Good, I'm glad. It was thrilling to think of what Uncle Carswell or his mother would have to say to all of this, how disgusted they would be with these people, and Henry found himself nodding eagerly about opinions he'd never spent much time thinking about one way or another. This is what he does to fight racism, guys. He says, yeah, Little Rock was good, even though my family are racist. Then they're playing charades, and he pulled The Birth of the Nation in a barely legible scratch that wasn't Effie's. Clara was sitting across Max's lap in the armchair, which distracted him for a moment. He knew that it was a movie and had something to do with the KKK, but that was all. The extent of acknowledgement of racism is astounding. The idea of this is that, it kind of coincides with the ideas I mentioned earlier about how he views his wife. Obviously, at this point in time, we have progressed so much in how we view things. The way we talk about things has changed. In literature from the past, we can kind of look past it a bit more for the story because it's they were in that time, those were the opinions that people held. So obviously that's going to be a part of their work. And we know that society has moved past those values, but they were prevalent at the time. We need to learn from them. I'm not saying ignore those themes in older books. I'm just saying that we can acknowledge and then discuss the themes and how they deal with them in that book. Because it's oh, in that time they had these views and these were prevalent themes in the book. Because if we were just going to ignore every problematic thing that were in old books, we wouldn't read any books at all. Because it's well, back then they had all these views that have changed now. And it's yes, I'm glad to see we have progressed. Obviously, we need to learn from that. So like acknowledge that those ideas are there in the older books. However, this book came out last year, as I said before. I know he's writing as if this was the 1950s, but I don't think we need something to be like, yeah, women didn't have rights back then. I don't think we needed something where he just expresses his sexist views about women because he's like, oh, well, in the 1950s, they viewed it that way. We don't need that now in a time when women need to be more empowered. They need to be paid the same amount of money. I want to make $800,000 from a debut book just like he did, but I won't because I'm a woman and he's a man. Need I remind you of the gap between what he was paid for this book and any woman was paid for their debut? Victoria Schwab got like $20,000 for her debut. He got $800,000 for this shit. The evidence is there. What I have learned from this experience is that instead of writing the book I want to write, I should write erotica. This sold really well. I imagine 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James sold really well. I imagine Anna Todd's After did really well. Seems like erotica sells. I know we know that sex sells, but I feel like the proof is here. Catch me writing and making all that money. Thank you if you stuck around this long. I know this video has been super long because I had a lot of thoughts and ideas to express. I had a lot I wanted to show from this book. I read it and there was just so much to think about. This man was paid $800,000 for this garbage. 1 star. First 1-star book of the year. Was it worth it? I guess we'll see how this video does and decide then. So this was a time I did a thing. Thanks for watching. Please comment down below your favorite or least favorite part of this book, and please subscribe for more fun bookish content from my channel. Hopefully not like this in the future. So I'll see you guys in my next video. It should be up very soon. So see you guys then. Okay. Bye! What is this? What did I sign up to read? Why? Does he understand what women are like? Has he ever met a woman? $800,000.